Ferguson, Missouri, which of course you guys all know about at this point. We haven't covered it on the show yet, so I wanted to just sort of do a general overview of what's been going on. Of course, 18-year-old Mike Brown was shot by police officer Darren Wilson about 10 days ago. Looks like 6 gunshots facing the officer, so he was not running away, actually facing the officer. We've just got a little breakdown of the timeline, so let's take a look at that. Okay, so on August 9th, Michael Brown, 18, robbed a convenience store and was shot to death by a police officer, Darren Wilson. He was unarmed but reportedly reached for the officer's gun. That seems to be up for debate at the moment. On August 10th, a candlelight vigil was held to honor Brown, which turned violent. More than a dozen businesses were vandalized and looted. More than 30 people were arrested and 2 police officers suffered injuries. Tensions rose between protesters and police every night. And a little bit more for you. On August 16th, a state of emergency was issued for the Ferguson area and a curfew was imposed from midnight to 5 a.m. The curfew was lifted after it failed to thwart any violence on August 18th. So the curfew has not been in effect for the last couple of days. This has become a huge media circus on top of the obviously awful situation in the first place. We've got a couple images of the militarization of the police, which this seems to be beyond the death. This seems to be the part that has everybody up in arms, so to speak. So these are just, we got 4 images for you. I mean, this really looks like, and you guys can chime in, of course, this looks more like a military than a police, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and I think this this photo and subsequent photos kind of spoke to why people thought that tensions were growing, because a large number of the protests, like 90% of the protests, were very peaceful. Yeah. But then some of these peaceful people were met with guns in their face, and then that kind of just, it's a snowball effect. And so you shouldn't. This
to me is the iconic one. A guy on what appears to be a tank, basically.
With the McDonald's in the background.
With the McDonald's in the background. That McDonald's actually got into the whole story because that's where the reporters got arrested immediately. But I mean, literally with a sniper rifle aiming at people.
You have a lot of weapons that are also going from military operations that are being passed over to police departments because of budget cuts. So you are seeing sort of an increased militarization of police officers because of the nature of the weapons that are available to them.
Yeah, okay, so I want to get to the militarization stuff after, but let's just start with what actually happened. And from everything I've been watching, I find it very hard to ascertain what the actual truth is. I don't know that we're ever going to get to the truth. You know, now they're saying that the officer had a broken eye socket because Mike might have punched him. Do you think we're ever going to get to the truth? Let's just start there.
I don't think we'll get to the truth because the 2 people involved, one is no longer here and one has been shrouded in secrecy. Like, he hasn't spoken up. He's delivered messages to friends who have then delivered messages, but it's gonna be one-sided. The story will always be one-sided. And like you said, you have a broken eye socket, but then there's another report that he wasn't in the hospital but for an hour or so. Right. And so you just have conflicting reports at everywhere you turn, and that's another reason why everyone's so angry, because in the very beginning there wasn't transparency. The people of Ferguson had no information. You know, his body was in the street for 4 hours uncovered. Like, these little things that keep coming out is just angering this town, and so it's creating divisiveness. It's now a race issue. It's just so much for this small city. It's overwhelming.
So speaking of lack of transparency, that to me also is the bigger part. Now we've got all the media there, but for the first couple of days, there seemed to be like a media blackout. There was a no-fly zone because somebody said somebody shot at a helicopter. How much of this really is just like a media circus at this point, beyond, again, the facts that we're trying to get to?
Yeah, I think the lack of transparency is one of the biggest issues, if not the main issue, because unfortunately, these incidents where we have the youth being shot by police officers happen time and time again. But this particular case and the way that it was handled, I think, has brought so much controversy and brought all the riots, right? They didn't even want to release the officer's name. We didn't even know it was Darren Wilson for a long time.
And then they've got officers policing the area now with no name tags, which I don't even know how that could possibly be legal.
At all. And we still don't have it. We barely got information about the autopsy too, right? We don't know if these shots were fired at close range or, you know, long range, and that's really going to impact the way we view this case as well. You know, if we find out that, you know, these shots were fired at long range, then there's really no case for this struggle that happened supposedly between Darren Wilson and Mike Brown, right? But we still don't have that information, and I think that's the issue, that we're getting a lag in all the information, and so much of it is being hidden.
Yeah. Now, Vanessa, according to my paper here, it says says you are African American?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. That
okay,
is
so then obviously you represent all African American people,
well,
because that's what they do on
That's
television.
what I put on my shoulders.
Yes.
It's a heavy burden
So
there.
as the representative of your community, how much, for the black community in America right now, how much of this goes beyond this particular incident and more to the bigger issue of race relations? And everyone said we're post-racial with Obama and all that kind of stuff.
And that phrase right there just angers the community more.
Yeah.
But it does go much further than just Mike Brown. We've had cases, Trayvon Martin is still a very sensitive topic. Oscar Grant at, Fruitvale Station. There's just so many
There was
times.
just another African American shot in St. Louis yesterday.
Exactly. Yeah. And so we're in a period where we want to be united as a nation, and we want to be all as one, and we want to look at this as America's problem, things that we all need to solve. But when you get to the root of it, it was a white officer and it was an unarmed black man. And so that tension is still there, and it's a difficult dialogue, but it's one that needs to be discussed so that there is healing, that we can move forward and we can all come together, because not every white man hates a black man, It's not that. And we can all sit together and be diverse and have these conversations and not have tension in those conversations too.
Yeah. What do you make about the people on the right that always say, well, look what's going on in Chicago? Because they always bring up Chicago. Probably since we started this, 10 people were shot in Chicago. I mean, it's almost that bad. But they say, well, we keep ignoring Chicago, but then we focus on this. What do you think of that?
I think that's a tough question, but I think, like I mentioned earlier, we have cases happening in Chicago and Illinois. We have them all over the country, so I don't think it's a Chicago issue. I don't think it's a, Ferguson issue. It's a national issue. Yeah. So for me, that's almost like a distraction tactic. They're saying, oh, but what about Chicago?
Right.
Let's
they don't care
divert your
about
focus.
Chicago until something happens somewhere else, and then suddenly they start caring about Chicago. All right, final thought on this. So just the media angle of it. Is there an inherent problem with the media that the media constantly, because they need people to watch, they have to keep ratcheting it up tension all the time? So you can already see how the media gets involved in the story. Chris Hayes on MSNBC, they spent half the day talking about how someone threw a rock at him. Someone did throw a rock at him, and then they spent a day talking about it. Apparently Don Lemon heard someone say the N-word, so then the story becomes about what Don Lemon heard. Like, how much is this just that the media just keeps this thing going? And yes, we need to shed light on it, of course, and we're talking about it right now, so right. I say that with all, with a grain of salt, but,
But it's one thing to tell the full scope of the story, and there's another thing when you are trying to create or manipulate the narrative. Yeah. And that's what happens a lot of times, instead of focusing on the case and what the facts are and what we're learning, they're focusing on the riots and the Molotov cocktails and looping 4 scenes over and over again to make it look like that is the only thing that's happening in Ferguson. And we need to really look at the fact that there are 3 autopsies that are happening, and the first one we heard are just preliminary reports. And so we are getting some information, and if we would just focus on the information we're getting and what we still need to get, then we won't get shrouded in distraction tactics as we have been.
Yeah. Final thought. So media, how do you decide who to trust when it comes to this kind of stuff?
I think it's really difficult to decide who to trust, but I think this makes an excellent case for having police officers wear body cameras and having some more video footage. Eyewitness testimony is awful. We know it doesn't work. We have different accounts here. Here's a perfect case for advocating for body cameras.
There you go. All right, so obviously that's just a little wrap up of what's been going on there. I hope we gave you a little insight into it. And of course, this story is not going anywhere.